Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we have got a Lord of the Rings stream. It seems like it's been a few weeks since we've done one of them, so let's rectify that now. And we are going to be talking about that guy, the Witch King of Angmar, who I've always found like one of the most fascinating characters because he is straight into it. Sauron is always this kind of slightly absent figure, it has to be said. When you're reading or watching The Lord of the Rings, he's definitely there. He's definitely the bad guy, but he stays in his home base. He stays in Mordor, and so in order for us to have, as readers, in order for us to have an adversary that we can sort of see and touch and be running away from, we have the Black Riders and the personification of them, the leader of them. We have the Witch King. So I've always found him this absolutely fascinating character that Tolkien has kind of, as we'll get to as we're talking about this, kind of iteratively brought to life, worked out what it means, how he has to pitch this character. He knew from very early on that he needed this character, but exactly who and what they were up to did evolve over a bit of time. Okay, so as always, what I will start by doing is giving a bit of an overview, a little bit of the history, and then I will get into some questions from my patrons. If you are here for the first time, welcome. If you're here for the 100th time, welcome to you as well. If you're here watching live, then there are some fantastic moderators out there. Carl Karsnark, I see you've just turned up. Great to see you. So please do get stuck into the chat and say hello to everyone. Now, let's do the history. So we have the Witch King, who was not always called the Witch King of Angmar. Why he's known as the Witch King, we will get onto in a moment. But he first appears as a result of Sauron's cunning plan with the rings. Now, forgetting what the sort of the implications that were of how they presented in the films, the initial idea was not for there to be 9 rings for men. That was a fallback plan. Sauron originally was there, the cunning plan. He was going to work with Celebrimbor. He was going to make these 16 rings, which he did. And the idea was that they were going to be for the elves, and he was going to be controlling the elves. But when he put on his one ring, they realized what was going on. They took off of their rings. He thought, oh no, this has not gone to plan. And he invaded. In typical Tolkien fashion, I've skipped lightly there over about 400 years worth of history. But Sauron goes, he invades Eregion in order to, well, partly just to invade, but partly to claim these rings. Now, he does manage to get hold of the 16. The 3, the Elven rings, which the 3 which were created without his direct input, those they managed to kind of smuggle out. As we know, those eventually ended up with Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf. But the 16, he did manage to recapture. Realizing, however, that this was not going to work on the elves, he then decided, fallback plan, plan B, I will distribute them to dwarves and humans. Now, there were 7 tribes of dwarves, so that neatly went to, okay, you can have 7 there. The clear implication is that the king of each of the different tribes of the dwarves got 1, and then he distributed the 9. Now, these went to 9 men, rulers, sorcerers, and warriors of their time. They were mighty in their time. And so just so you've got an idea of kind of timescales, we're talking, this is the mid part of the Second Age. So the sack of Eregion was 1694, and he distributed these. We don't know the exact timings, but at some point over the years that followed. And he gave them to what were clearly ambitious humans. And the rings, initially, they amplified their powers. They allowed them to live long lives, and they also helped make them sort of invisible. So these were powerful magical items. It was easy, I suspect, for him to distribute them, but humans fell under their power and influence a lot more easily than other races did. So by the year 2251, we get the first mention of ring wraiths. So by this point, their lives have, roughly the idea, their lives have kind of got thin and stretched, and eventually they kind of disappear and they become wraiths. So they are now invisible beings tied to this mortal plane by the power of the rings. One of those 9 is the person that we will know of as the Witch King of Angmar. Now, I will get into his identity. I've got some questions about that. We can probably say, just to clear this up to start with, he probably was one of the 3 who we know was in Mordor, in Numenor, and he very probably was a sorcerer, a magic user already. This amplified his powers. He, however, is not really mentioned by name in the Second Age, and the ringwraiths themselves don't seem to play a hugely prominent role in the history of the Second Age. And when Sauron gets defeated at the end of the Second Age, the scene, we get the last alliance of elves and men, ring cut from his finger, etc. Sauron basically is defeated, and it takes him 1,000 years to recover sufficiently to find himself a new base in Dol Guldur and southern Mirkwood. And a little while after that, about 300 years after that, the Witch King reappears in the north. Now, at this point, nobody knows. And when I say in the north, if you imagine the map of Middle-earth, you've got the Misty Mountains sort of going up north-south-ish. Right at the top of that is the area we now know as really Angmar. He reappeared there. And at the time, nobody knew who he was. They didn't know that he was a servant of Sauron. They didn't know that he was one of the ringwraiths. They didn't even know, most people didn't even know he was a wraith. So he then started summoning evil in the same way that we've seen Morgoth and Sauron do at various points in time. He kind of summons evil to himself. He gathers orcs, he gathers evil-minded men and other foul, nasty beings gathered to himself. And he starts this very long campaign against Arnor. Now, after Numenor fell, we know Elendil and his sons escaped. The sons set themselves up in Gondor. Elendil set himself up in Arnor, up in the north. Now, this becomes 2 kingdoms. Originally, Arnor was that was where the High King was, but after Elendil's death, after Isildur's death, that kind of ends. They don't keep that title in active use up in the north, the High King, so they just become the King of Arnor. And over time, by the time we've got to when the Witch King starts to make his presence known up in the north, that kingdom has actually fractured into 3 kingdoms, Rudor, Cardolan, and Arthedain. Now, he then sets about, over time, weakening them, destroying them. That's his aim, because these are the enemies. Ultimately, these are the enemies of Sauron. These are the descendants of the faithful in Numenor. These are people that he holds responsible for Sauron's downfall. So he's focusing his attention in there through a combination of political machinations and sending a plague and invasions from time to time over a very long period of time. Remember, so he starts here in the year 1300. The final battle we have with his final win, where he destroys what effectively are the final vestiges of the final one of those 3 kingdoms to survive, which is Arthedain. Then there is this battle called the Battle of Fornost. Now, that battle is after his victory. So he's there happily sat in his castle, his new castle, and then the combined forces of good come towards him. Círdan has roused himself, gathered together a group of allies, some from Lindon, some some forces come up from Gondor. There's even apparently a little group of hobbits who've made their way up to the Shire, because technically they were there under the rulership of the King of Arthedain. So we have this huge battle. The Witch King is, it would appear, overconfident, and rather than sitting in his well-fortified castle, he heads out onto the battlefield and takes them on the battlefield with no inbuilt defensive advantage. And it seems that he sort of underestimated them. Perhaps he underestimated the potential for there being so many different forces all coming together. It's not 100% clear, but his army was largely vanquished. And we get this moment, again, I've got a question about this, so I'll dig into the details of this a bit later. We get this moment when he decides, right, that's it. I'm just going to go straight for the jugular. And he charges towards the Gondorian king, who's and the Witch King gives out this aura of fear wherever he goes, and his horse bolts, and the Witch King laughs, and then he suddenly realizes Glorfindel is there. Now, Glorfindel is amazing. Glorfindel is hugely powerful, and if you sort of go through the history of Glorfindel and the Nazgul, you'll find that they always kind of avoid him. They know power where they see it. So Glorfindel appears, the Witch King sort of goes, okay, I'm out of here. And he charges off. At which point the King of Gondor has managed to get his horse back under control and goes to give chase. And Glorfindel goes, no. And he gives that prophecy, the not by the hand of man prophecy, which I will dig into a little bit more later. And basically, they let the Witch King go. So he heads off, and 5 years or so later, he resurfaces. Who'd have thought it, in Mordor? And so he then takes place or leads the other Nazgul who's called there in this siege of Minas Ithil. Now, Minas Ithil we know now as Minas Morgul. It was a twin city of Minas Tirith, which was previously known as Minas Arnor, but it was the twin city there. They besieged it, and they won it, and they turned that into their base. And so he is now the Lord of Minas Morgul. Now, he, for the next few decades, basically rules there. All of this time, in case you're wondering, Sauron is still hiding out in southern Mirkwood in Dol Guldur. And the Nazgul must surely know this, but they're kind of, the impression I get anyway, is that they're not wishing to draw attention to him. He's regaining his strength. He's taking his time. He's slowly creeping. His influence is creeping out over Mirkwood. He's gathering his forces. So they're not sort of going to him and helping him direct. They're letting him get on with that. But they are now holding on to Mordor, and the Witch King decides, I've dealt with the kingdom in the north, let's deal with the kingdom in the south now. He takes out Osgiliath as well, Ithilien, which is that sort of patch of land there. If you imagine, you got the big river, and then you get Mordor sort of next to it, the bit between the river and Mordor, that's Ithilien. That he basically takes over as well. And then he sends these taunting messages to Eanor, who's the new king of Gondor, basically says, yeah, come on then, let's do this one-on-one. You come to Minas Morgul and we'll fight. And eventually, ridiculously, Eanor agrees, and he heads off with his men and is never seen from again. And that is the end of the line of kings in Gondor, which is why they have stewards, because he just disappeared. It's not that there was a battle that everybody saw and he died, and so they could say, okay, so who's next in line? Well, that person, they're now king. They didn't know. They couldn't be 100% certain. They'd only just really emerged from a really damaging battle between different claimants or war between different claimants for the crown. The idea of crowning a new king, well, the old king might have just been captured and might emerge. That didn't really appeal. So the steward basically said, okay, I'll take control, but I'm not being king, you understand? I'm just taking control for a while. I'll put my chair down here, not on the throne. I'm right all the way down here. I'm not going to wear the crown. Promise I'm not being a king. So, but then that carried on. So, the Witch King has, if we just give him this sort of like very quick report card for his actions and this part of the Third Age, he has almost single-handedly destroyed the northern kingdom of Arnor. He's gone down to the south. He's recaptured and is now refortifying Mordor, and he has destroyed large parts of Gondor and eliminated the Gondorian monarchy. So he's having a strong midsection to the Third Age, it has to be said. We then don't hear huge amounts about him for the next while until we reach the War of the Ring, at which point we're sort of heading into the story we know. So I'll sort of speed describe my way through this one. After Gollum gets captured just before the War of the Ring, and they get a bit of info. Sauron gets a bit of information about Baggins and Shire. That's when Sauron decides, okay, I'm going to send my best guys out here. He doesn't want. He's thinking about it. Who can I send out there relatively incognito? If I send out an orc squad, everybody will know I'm on maneuvers. I can't be doing that. A troll, it would be even more conspicuous. Maybe he could have sent a few humans, but the people he trusted the most, the people that he knew were powerful enough to face down most opponents that they could face, with a Nazgul. So he sends out the Nazgul. First of all, remember, they're wraiths. They're invisible. First of all, uncloaked. So just as these invisible beings heading off, searching for Baggins in the Shire, eventually they do put on the black cloak and the horses. They head off. They first of all check in with Saruman. Saruman says, "Oh, Gandalf's the only person who knows." They go off looking for Gandalf, but they find Grima. Grima says everything he knows. They discover where the Shire is. They head off up to the Shire. At which point they don't know exactly where they are. Is it where the ring might be? They're pretty sure that it's somewhere near the in the Shire or near the Shire at this point. But the Witch King, he sends Camul, who's his lieutenant, and two other Black Riders into the Shire. This is after a battle with the Rangers, the Dunedain Rangers, on the fords on the border of the Shire. He sends three in there. He heads off with the rest eastwards just to sort of check out, see what's going on. Camul reports back a little bit later saying, okay, pretty sure Baggins has now escaped the Shire. They start hunting around, trying to find him. And they end up, some of them, in Bree, and they're still. Aragorn takes off with them, with the hobbits, heads up to Weathertop. The Witch King is there with a group of there are 5 of them in total, of the Nazgul at Weathertop. At which point they attack, they confront, and although, yes, Aragorn is truly heroic, jumping in with the fire and the sword and everything. Incidentally, that was Viggo Mortensen's first scene that he actually recorded, he was filmed for, when he's like jumping in and just being ultimate Aragorn there, which is a great way to start. But so the Witch King is the one who stabs Frodo, and then they withdraw. Now, the way it's often presented is that Aragorn drove them off. In reality, they withdrew thinking that's it, job done. because they stabbed him, the Witch King had stabbed Frodo, the point had come off and is now burrowing its way towards his heart. He would become a wraith. So they thought all we have to do now is just wait. It should only take a few days. They follow at a distance. They get a little bit caught up by the fact that Glorfindel appears once more. He's standing on a bridge, which means that the Nazgul are like, yeah, I'm not going that way, and they have to go like a whole day or so out of their path to go find another way over the river. Then Glorfindel meets up with the Fellowship, not the Fellowship yet, obviously, with the Hobbits and Aragorn. And we get that final confrontation at the Fords of Bruinen. It is the Witch King who's the one, and with two others, who head into the waters, and the rest get pushed in there by Glorfindel and Aragorn behind them, kind of like ushering them in with fire and Glorfindel's mere presence, and they all get washed away. Up to later in the story, because they kind of like, it takes them a little while to get back to home base, but it is the Witch King who Sauron puts in charge of his army for that massive attack over onto Minas Tirith. So he's there, and he is leading, not just being sort of with his military prowess, there's also magic going on. You'll remember Grond, the big battering ram. That was magical, but the Witch King himself cast some magic which caused an explosion and the gates to break off. So it was the combination of his magic and Grond which did that. And then he goes through the gates. And Gandalf is the only one who is there, basically standing up against him, at which point we get the Riders of Rohan appearing. He heads back off, and then we reach his end, which again I will talk about in more detail later. So that is the Witch King. He is, as I said right at the very beginning, he takes on this role as being an embodiment of the evil of Sauron out in the story. Sauron stays back in Mordor, in Barad-dûr, and the closest we have as his representative out there in the world is the Witch King. And also, incidentally, we'll talk about earlier drafts of this in a bit, but when you get to the mouth of Sauron, if you remember the mouth of Sauron, who basically comes out as an ambassador to speak on behalf of Sauron a little bit later, originally the idea was that that was going to be the Witch King. The Witch King would be the person who comes out, until Tolkien decided that actually he would kill the Witch King a little bit earlier in the story. But that is the idea. There is very strong. If there's anyone here who can speak on behalf of Sauron, it is him. DM Collins saying, "Oh wow, I never get to be here for a live chat. Welcome, great to see you." And She's saying, if Ecthelion the elf had been there, the Nazgul wouldn't even have dared to be 100 leagues near the Shire. Yeah, Ecthelion the elf is he's another one of the elves back from the First Age. You may remember Glorfindel back in the First Age, always singing Glorfindel's praises. He killed the Balrog. That's how badass he was. Ecthelion, yeah, he killed the Lord of the Balrogs, so he was like even more powerful and impressive. But it was Glorfindel who got sent back. Okay, let's go to a few questions from my patrons. And I'll just take this as a moment actually to say, patrons, thank you. I always say this, I always mean this, I cannot do what I do without your support. It means so much to me, so thank you very much. A small way of saying thank you is to prioritize your questions here on these live streams. So that's why I do what I do. If you do wish to support the channel, the best way is through Patreon. There's a link down in the description. Ninja Robbo saying, "Hi, Robert. I hope you are doing well." I am, thank you. I'm sure Tolkien wouldn't approve of the phrase, but what do you, which is a great way to start a question, but what do you think of the Witch King's power level, specifically as it relates to the early part of the Third Age and the fall of Arnor? Looking at a map, it appears that Gondor has the more difficult job, being right next to Sauron and Mordor, but in the end, it's Arnor that falls to Angmar. And being the seat of the High King, I always assumed Arnor should be the more powerful of the two. This suggests that the Witch King is more powerful than Sauron, but is that even possible? Okay, so there's lots of layers here. First of all, in terms of would Tolkien have improved of the concept of power level, well, he probably wouldn't have liked the phraseology. I think I would agree, but he does talk quite a bit when he's describing people about how powerful they are. For example, he says that Fëanor was the most powerful of the elves. Galadriel was the most powerful of the elves left in Middle Earth in the Third Age. That's the kind of thing he talks about. This person is powerful, which is quite broad of him, because for him, power is a quite all-encompassing thing. It's part magical, part physical prowess, part authority. There's a lot of layers that go into this. So to say someone like Galadriel is powerful is not the same as saying that the Balrog is powerful. The Balrog is powerful. Galadriel is powerful, but their power often can be in different ways. So that's just covering off the idea of power level. In terms of the sort of geopolitical situation, so Sauron at this point was weakened still. He was weakened all the way through the Third Age. Because at the end of the Second Age, that's when the ring was cut from his finger. It took him 1,000 years to actually sort of become the necromancer and start to rebuild himself and rebuild his power. By the time we get to the 3,000 or so years later, to the end of the Third Age, the story of the Lord of the Rings, he has recovered some of his power. He does have a physical body by that point, but he's clearly not the same as he used to be. So Sauron in the Third Age, if you're looking for a comparator, is not as powerful. And of course, he does not have his one ring into which he poured a lot of his power. In terms of relative power between Gondor and Arnor, yeah, I absolutely understand. And of course, Sauron, I should clarify, was not in Mordor at that time. But in terms of relative power between Gondor and Arnor, I absolutely get and understand at the start of the Third Age, probably Arnor was the more powerful. So the issue was that its first king died, then its second king died before he even managed to make it up there, Isildur. Its third king was just a child when he inherited. And if you then start looking over the history of what happens next, it kind of fractured. Gondor managed to retain structural integrity, as it were, whereas Arnor fractured into three smaller kingdoms. So the way Tolkien, this is in the appendices, the way Tolkien describes this is basically like, and I've got the exact quote coming up in just one moment, don't worry. It's basically like the Witch King was looking like, where shall I devote my attentions for the next few hundred years? I could go to Gondor, I could go to Arnor, and this is what we read. The lord of that land was known as the Witch King, but it was not known until later that he was indeed the chief of the Ringwraiths, who came north with the purpose of destroying the Dunedain in Arnor, seeing hope in their disunion while Gondor was strong. So it's actually not so much a matter of he took on the stronger power. He thought, where do I have the best chance of success here? And then he went there. just as a sort of a very brief addendum on the power level thing, and I don't know whether you were looking for this level of granularity, but the Witch King and the other Nazgul they didn't have the same power level, as it were, all the time. It wasn't equal. They were affected by a number of things, and particularly darkness, night. They were stronger. And right at the very end of the Third Age, we find that when the Witch King heads back to Mordor, and before he goes out at the head of Sauron's army, Sauron, we're told, and we're not given detail of this, so I guess we have to interpret it as we wish. Sauron gave him additional demonic force, which basically is like a power up. The details, Tolkien's always quite vague on magical details, so the details aren't there, but he was greater in power at the very end of the Lord of the Rings than he was at the beginning of the Lord of the Rings. So Roman Lakovets saying, rookie question, why did Tolkien decide to make Sauron the main villain of the Lord of the Rings instead of Morgoth? Well, don't ever worry about rookie questions. That's fine. So Morgoth was the big bad guy of this creation, as it were. And Tolkien, we always have to remember that although we think of the Lord of the Rings being the main event, and then there's like Silmarillion and some other things sort of as bits of sort of world background, that's not how it was for Tolkien. Tolkien devoted his life to developing this world. And so the Silmarillion was developed over literally decades, up to the point where he started writing, well, first of all, The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. So by the time he got to The Lord of the Rings, he'd already got this history. And in this history, Morgoth had been vanquished. This is what happens at the end of the First Age of Middle-earth. We normally talk about the second age is like the forging of the Rings of Power, etc. The Third Age is the age in which the Lord of the Rings itself happens. So Morgoth has long gone, but his chief lieutenant Sauron is still around. So that is why he is the main antagonist in this story. Commando Ray with a question saying, I couldn't think of a serious question to ask about the Witch King, but how would he fare in A Song of Ice and Fire? Not just in the story, but what about Valyria? Well, first of all, you did that as a channel member. Thank you very much. I should say, if for whatever reason, I talked about Patreon a moment ago, that is the best way to support this channel. If for whatever reason you can't or don't want to do Patreon, and you do want to support the channel, you can become a channel member, and you get a certain number of sort of highlighted questions, and your name sort of appears in lights here on my little screen. So you're more likely to be seen. But it's another way to support the channel if you wish to do so. So thank you very much, and thank you, channel members. But in terms of the question, how would he fare in A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, I mean, this is I've got a randomly. I have got another question, a more specific question on this one a bit later. But I will just sort of say, in A Song of Ice and Fire, particularly to start with, it's a low fantasy setting. If you've not looked at book one recently, the prologue has got the others, high fantasy. The literal last page of the book has got the introduction of dragons, high fantasy. We've got about a chapter in the middle of Bran having sort of weird magical dreams, high fantasy. The rest, low fantasy. And that slowly over time, the fantasy level increases. So it's almost like each book we get a little bit more, and it's not just like we see a bit more of the others, we see a bit more of the dragons. Suddenly we get Melisandre introduced. What can Melisandre do? Well, she can see visions in the flames, she can produce shadow babies, she can protect herself from poison. She can glamour, and there's this whole list of all these amazing things she could do. Then we're getting whites and zombies and things like that going on. We've got rumors of krakens. We've got a million different bits of magic. So one of the things I would say, just on A Song of Ice and Fire, whenever we do get the next books, expect the magic level to go up at another notch, and then another notch. This is starting low fantasy, ending high fantasy. So in like the early parts of A Song of Ice and Fire, the Witch King would be way over and above power levels everybody else in the main story. When we get to the end of the story, that situation may well be different, because you're facing, just to take one example, someone like Bran, who may be physically not particularly powerful, but if you start breaking down, well, what can he do if he's accessing the Weirwood network? Well, we're told he will eventually be able to go beyond the trees and see things at any point in history, and he can start interacting with things at any point in history, which is way beyond where the Witch King's at. The Witch King can do pretty impressive things, but he certainly can't be doing that. As for Valyria, well, I dare say the Doom of Valyria would have, the blow would have done damage, but unless it was, as it might have been, magical, then what is keeping the Witch King tied to this mortal plane is the power of the ring, and that needed a specific type of magic to sever that. So unless it was that specific type of magic, and the specific type of magic, of course, was what the sword Mary had, stabbing him, unless you had that specific type of magic to sever his connection to the mortal realm and his connection to the ring, then you wouldn't be able to destroy him. You could take him out of action for a very long time, I suspect, but not destroy him. Stephanie Frederick, hi, great to see you. Martin S, maybe I asked this before, but I think Tolkien used lieutenant in an unusual way when it came to Dark Lord subordinates. The Witch King, in terms of military authority in Mordor, was more like general or even marshal. Yeah, I think you or someone else has talked about this before, and I think you're right. Lieutenant is used more in, he doesn't talk military grades, military ranks. He uses captain as quite a generic, a leader of a group of people. You have the captains of Rohan, but also Aragorn can be described as captain and a king. So there's, although within Rohan you can, if you nerdily start digging around, which I have done in the past, you can discover now how many Rohirrim would a captain be able to be in charge of. You can start doing that, but he used that much more generically. The lieutenant, or lieutenant if you're American, then that is not an army rank per se. That is right-hand man is probably the best way of putting it. So Sauron is described as being Morgoth's chief lieutenant, and he is. Then we get the Witch King is his lieutenant. So we get various examples of this, and so it's used in a more, I think the best way to understand it is used in a more colloquial sense than a strict army rank sense. Yes, he was very much the general of his army as well. Question from John Ston, channel member, thank you, saying, hi Robert and Dan, any thoughts on how much of his own thoughts and ambitions the Witch King still possessed? Yes, so Tolkien doesn't dive into the detail of this, but it's clear that they have their own volition. They're not being sort of controlled by Sauron. Sauron's not sort of moving them about to do various things. So, but they are under his control, in as much as now what they are, that they are basically their servants to the ring. And as he is the Lord of the Rings, then he is their master. But they, out and about, have their own sort of free will. So my take on this is that they get given their marching orders. Sauron would have said, "Okay, head out, go hunt for Shire and Baggins. The place to start is probably the Anduin Valley. That's where the ring was last seen. So go from there." But then it was up to them to decide what they do. Sauron wasn't directing. When you get towards the Shire, you find it's actually quite a complex set of directions. The Witch King saying, "Okay, we've reached the Shire. I'm going to send 3 of you in there. I'm going to head off here with the rest in sort of an eastwards direction." And at another point, he breaks them down into twos, and he goes with the fastest two. Another point, he sends 4 here and 5 there. He's very much making these decisions, tactical decisions himself, as that's going along. I think you are probably thinking even more broadly than that. What about his own ambitions? And that we're not really let into. He obviously sets himself up as a king, and then he sets himself up in charge of Minas Morgul. So he certainly seems happy with his lot as being the ruler, the leader person. It's just that now the extent of his ambitions, when you're talking about his own thoughts and ambitions, the extent of his ambitions ultimately are always driven by serving the ring and the Lord of the Rings. Okay, let's go to a question from A.D. Ross saying, "Greetings, Sir Robert, and to you too. Hope you and Dan are well." We are. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on whether Arnor's fall was more a result of its own weakness, such as low population, splintered successions, and then other external factors such as plagues, or whether it was more the result of the Witch King of Angmar and Angmar's strength. Gondor certainly seems to be more the stronger of the 2 kingdoms, withstanding the Witch King in Minas Morgul for centuries, and even providing the lockout blow to his northern kingdom. So my feeling, it was more of a case of Arnor's weakness. Do you agree? Well, as we noted earlier, he chose, back in the middle of the Third Age, he chose to start what he was doing focused on Arnor because of what he saw as their weakness and their division. What he did was he exploited it. So I don't think it's just this, was this more important or that more important? I think he saw the weaknesses and he exploited them. So, for example, what he did was the first thing he focused in on Rudor, which was one of the 3 kingdoms up there, and he sent humans in there to basically turn it against itself, to sow disruption and dissension, and that paved the way for him to eventually be attacking it. When he when things were getting a little bit further along the way, there was a plague. Now, the clear implication from the text is that the plague was sent by the Witch King. So I think what we've got is a weak, divided set of kingdoms that division was exploited by the Witch King. Now, in terms of Angmar's strengths, I think the other element to this I would probably just add is Angmar didn't really exist before he got there. There was this area, but he took over as king and he created this kingdom. So anything that we sort of attribute to Angmar's strength, that was down to him building up this kingdom over time. Martin S. The issue with crossovers of between worlds is subjective. How powers interact. Does Valyrian steel or dragon glass work on Nazgul? Will Balefire from Wheel of Time work on non-Wheel of Time characters? Not in the pattern. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you completely there. So, um, what we have, at the risk of sort of getting onto a discussion we're going to have a bit later, but we have, let's say, the others who we know they're incredibly powerful, but they're incredibly vulnerable to getting stabbed with Valyrian steel. We get the Witch King, who is incredibly powerful, but we know is incredibly vulnerable to being stabbed by the sword that Merry had, which came, incidentally, we were talking about the Angmar Wars, that was forged back then by people who were presumably wanting to kill the Witch King all the time back then. So does that mean that the Witch King is immune to Valyrian steel? Or would that have the same effect? Does that mean that the others are immune to whatever weapon magic Merry had? That you're right. These are the kind of imponderables that we find it hard to sort of go through. So exact measurements of power in one against another, when you get to magic, are very hard. When you're just talking to humans, then I think it's a bit easier. Martin S. saying, and neither author will have total authority in the sense of their word being canon because it is not canon in the other author's world. Yeah, exactly. A well-made point. Thank you. Let's go to Stephen saying, hi, Robert and Dan. There is a question I have wondered for a long time, and someone has to ask it. Who was the man who became the Witch King? From what I understand, it is one of the big unanswered questions of Tolkien's world, and I would love to hear your interpretation. Was he a Númenórean? Perhaps even one of their kings? If so, did he play an important part in Númenor's decline? As a literary question, did Tolkien intentionally keep his identity mysterious, or was it just a detail that he did not get round to developing? Okay, well, let's tackle the first bit. Who is he? We have to be upfront about this, there is no definitive answer from Tolkien. But we have some clues. So, he was a man, a human. The nine were given to humans. He was, we're told they were given to kings and sorcerers and warriors. The implication, I think, of the fact that he is a magic user is that he probably was one of the ones counted as being a sorcerer. We know that 3 of the Nazgul were Númenóreans, which probably reflects the fact that Númenor was the greatest human civilization there. So there's probably more from there than they were from any one other place. And it makes sense if one of those 3 was the Witch King. So when I say it makes sense, we've got 2 things here. Firstly, we have, if you dig deep into sort of the Tolkien notes and scribbles, you'll find that after the Lord of the Rings was translated into, I think, Swedish and Dutch, Tolkien, being a philologist, he had a great fascination with the translations of his work. And if you ever read his letters, then you'll see him sort of writing like all these incredibly erudite but quite nerdy and focused points about the translation of his text into other languages. He did write some what I think were originally called notes for translators after those first couple, just sort of clarifying the sort of the etymological basis for some words, names, things like that. And these have been retained and published. And one of his scribbles there. So this was something that he wrote after the publication of the Lord of the Rings, a few years after the publication of the Lord of the Rings, was that the Witch King was probably Numenorian. Now, this, for those who've not come across this before, this again is typical Tolkien, because in his writing conceit, is what we probably call it these days, he was not just the creator of this world. He was in this creation as somebody who is discovering these old texts and then just translating them. And so he would often, when he was asked questions about something that happened in his world, in his creation, then he would say, well, probably this, but we don't know. And that could come across as quite frustrating, but that was his way of doing it. So him saying probably this, he was Numenorian, is as close as we're going to get to Tolkien telling us, yes, he was Numenorian. Added to that, the fact that he is taller than the other Nazgul, and the Numenorians are noticeably tall, particularly those of royal stock. Now, I do not think that he was a Numenorian king, because we have the history of the Numenorian kings, and we know how they died, and he didn't die. He just faded. So it's pretty clear to me that he wasn't a Numenorian king. He was a Numenorian magic user, probably from the royal line. And I think that is about as far as we can really go with that one. Gadzooks had a kind of a follow-up topic or question there. Who are the other Nazgul? So there are 9. There's only one named, which is Khamul the Easterling. Now, that's probably pretty much all we know about him. He came from the east, so Run, which is just the word for east. Given the fact we've got 3 from Numenor, and I would say of those other 2, I think the same logic applies. I don't think either of them were kings, which means that they're either sorcerers or mighty warriors. The other, how many? What? 4. The other 5 will have been from humans from other parts of Middle Earth. So, yeah, there's probably one from Harad or Umbar. There's probably some from sort of the lands, sort of Ravanian and that kind of area. There's probably another one from Run. They'll have been dotted around from various places. And given the fact that we're saying none of the 3 Numenorians were kings, then probably 1 or 2 of the other ones were kings as well. But that is all we know. Tolkien did not give us the detail on it. And so going back to Stephen's sort of second part, the literary question, why did Tolkien keep his identity and their identities a mystery? I think it's a good question. I think it's almost to kind of like add to the mystery. This is from my perspective of what they're capable of, and also to, again, talk from the literary perspective, to dehumanize them. Because Tolkien was very clear that the idea was that these were humans who have been affected and impacted by the power of the rings. Which means that by the time we meet them as the Nazgul, they are ex-humans, they're wraiths. So actually, who they were before is nothing important to who they are now. So I think that's the kind of the high level. But as I say, the flip side of that is this idea of, if you keep it a bit mysterious, then you do not know what they're capable of. So, and he kept on dropping in every now and then new things, with them. You get them. They've got this magical dagger that it can break off and that can worm its way into your heart. The black breath that can knock people out. They've got this aura of fear all around them, and it's just like a bang. Here's another thing. Here's another thing. They're now riding on these big fell beasts. There's the Witch King. He can control these the Barrow Wights. It's that all this time there's another thing. Here's another thing. Here's another thing, and that is it's a literary tool to make you go, well, I can't draw a ring around what this person or this character is capable of because they are mysterious. They are a bit of a blank slate. It's for me, as a literary example, the best there is that I've come across was Dracula, which has lost so much of his impact now because nowadays we know what vampires can do. But when that was written, the idea of a vampire was, yes, it had been sort of in folk tales and the like, but what is this being capable of? And then what Bram Stoker did was bit by bit, doesn't appear in a mirror. Scampering up walls, turns into bats. I mean, it's just like bit after bit after bit, just drip, drip, drip. We do not know what this creature is capable of being and doing. And that is what adds to the scare factor. And that is the same principle here that I think that applies to the Nazgul and to the Witch King in particular. Buttoned up reader, was he one of the faithful who fell into darkness? So the faithful, just for context, so on Numenor, you get two factions grew up. The King's Men, who were supportive of the kings of Numenor, who were increasingly against the elves and the Valar and all that is good and right in the world, and then the faithful who stuck by that. And the faithful at the end, headed up by Elendil, Isildur, etc. So is he one of the faithful who kind of fell? Possibly, although the faithful as a concept, it grew over time, but when this started out, when the rings were distributed, Numenor was still broadly on the side of the elves. So you have, I mentioned right at the very top, the sack of Eregion. He invaded Eregion, he claimed the rings, which he then distributed. He carried on that invasion and took over most of the map of Middle-earth that we know, until he got driven back by this alliance between the elves and Numenor, and they pushed him all the way back to Mordor. So at that point, the political situation in Numenor wasn't as charged and wasn't as divided as it was later on, and that is roughly the point at which those rings were distributed. So I think my answer is probably no, but maybe a proto-faithful. Who knows? It's somebody who wanted power, because that is what was being offered. Question from DM Collins. DM Collins. Was Numenor more steampunk than adaptations let on? Could we read any post-gunpowder or post-industrial tech into post-Numenorian or Angmarian war histories, or in the ruins through Middle-earth? Great question. I did do a video, I can't remember what I ended up calling it, which explored this. Steampunk Numenor, I don't know whether that's exactly what that in my brain I was writing a video about steampunk Numenor. So you get lots of, when Tolkien writes about Numenor, and he did write a reasonable amount about it, but sort of just in patches. He has one long story, the Mariner's Wife. He we get the sort of the annals of the kings, but and sort of a description of life in Numenor, but there's lots of gaps going on there. But we do get these kind of passing references to things that do seem quite well steampunky. You get the great armament, the ships sound, a lot of them, a bit like ironclads rather than majestic sailing ships. There's one passing reference to the Numenorians kind of flying over Middle Earth and being treated almost like gods by the people who are there. So there are lots of these, and they seem to have guns and the like. Don't forget, so gunpowder of some kind does exist in Middle Earth. Theoretically, it's not generally seen as a good thing. Saruman uses it. The orcs, when they're attacking Helm's Deep, they blast a hole in the wall using what seems to be gunpowder or some magical explosive of some kind. So these things are there. When you're talking about post-Numenorian histories and the ruins in Middle-earth, what is very clear is that things that were built in the immediate post-Numenorian world in Middle-earth were built using what I would call magical technologies that have been lost. So, classic example is the Tower of Orthanc. Now, we think of that as Saruman's tower. Saruman only arrived there quite late in its history. It was built maybe even at the very end of the Second Age, but probably the beginning of the Third Age, by Numenorians, effectively, whether they actually were still on Numenor or whether this is post-end of Numenor and they'd retained some knowledge. They brought some knowledge back with them. So basically what we have, Numenor, Great Island Kingdom, height of human civilization, that gets drowned, destroyed, act of God himself. And the way that Tolkien always thinks of this is very much like Atlantis, but also like, say, the fall of Rome. And it wasn't, historians can debate this, but it wasn't exactly like this. But the colloquial history we have is that Rome falls, Constantinople falls, and then we get the Dark Ages. They're called the Dark Ages because all of that great knowledge and technology that we used to have, that got lost. And so we then had to build our way back up again. And that's the kind of feel that we have here in Middle-earth, which is that there was all of this great technology, and then there are some scattered buildings and things which are built with that technology, but we now do not know how they're built. Orthanc, to continue where I was a minute or two ago, before my digression, Orthanc is built with that, and the way it's described is it's made of this black stone, which, if you're readers of A Song of Ice and Fire, you'll know black stone is similar there. That it seems unbreakable, and it has these magical symbols on the top, on the roof where Gandalf was kept prisoner. There's these magical symbols kind of everywhere. You cannot attack it, you cannot destroy it, you can't. Ents would like bashing themselves against it and hurting themselves. It just, there's nothing you could do about it. This was built with technology that no longer exists in Middle Earth. So there's definitely hints of steampunk in Numenor, and there's definitely more than hints of the fact that whatever technology was there, the Numenorians had, has now been lost and is now just this kind of echo of lost civilizations and lost knowledge. Let's go to a question from Caius Ballerina. Were the ring wraiths all from the same generation, or were the rings passed out over hundreds of years? Well, we're not told the details of this. It's an interesting question. They were distributed, and the clear implication is that they were distributed at roughly the same time, but we're not told that exactly. What we're told is when the ring wraiths, when Sauron captures the rings, which is 1600 and something, and then when the ring wraiths appear, which is 2150, I think. So that's the time period we have. The suggestion is it takes a long time. It extended their lifetimes, and then slowly they turned into wraiths. So perhaps well, given that these are dotted around Middle Earth, 3 were in Numenor, the rest weren't, and at least one of them was off in the east. The others were probably dotted about in different places. I don't think he kind of put out the message, anybody want a magic ring? Come to Mordor and I'll give you... That doesn't seem to be what it was. The suggestion is he must have journeyed out and found the people that he could give the ring to. So in my mind, it's all of the same generation, but this took him probably a matter of a few years to head out to different places and to distribute them. Madge O'Shea, you kept me sane in my degree and my now post-grad crisis. Oh, that means a lot to me. Thank you. Although crisis, post-grad crisis, that doesn't sound good. I hope things are going okay. Would Tolkien, as a Catholic, believe that there was any hope for salvation for the Nazgul? I that's again another good question. Good questions today, guys. So I'll take as the starting point orcs, because he angsted about orcs and salvation for a very long time. He didn't. He was very clear in his mind they could not be unredeemable, I think was the word he used. That did not work for him, because everything ultimately was created. Whatever happened, however corrupted things came from, the only being that could create things ex nihilo was God himself, which meant that everything had, although it could be corrupted, it could become evil, the life force within it, the secret fire that created it, ultimately the bits that made it up, that was holy and from God. So he really struggled with this idea about orcs, and he insisted that they weren't unredeemable. You can read about this in his letters, and this is why he went through 4 or 5 different iterations of what orcs are, and by implication, what happens to orcs when they die. And is it possible that, an orc did repent or something along those lines? So that, I think, is the starting point we have. Is that the case for wraiths? Now, it's hard to get into Tolkien's mind in this. We have to say, okay, we've got are things in general unredeemable? No. Could Gollum have repented? Well, in a fashion, he did for a little while. So he certainly wouldn't have seen Gollum, who was affected by the ring in a huge way. That way, I think the question would probably be, as I say, it's hard to get into Tolkien's mind, but the moment they became the Wraith, did that mark kind of the end of their life and therefore their redeemability? Is the bit afterwards, they've made their bed now and they have to lie in it? It's possible. I mean, this feels like the kind of thing that Tolkien would have probably called a three-piper or something like that. He would have gone down to the pub and thought about it and debated it quite a lot. But we don't have a fundamental answer on that one, is what I'm sort of talking my way around. Reflective rambling. Hi there. Great to see you. Picking up a question for Miriam Emery. Thank you. I love it when people pick up questions for others. I hugely appreciate it. Saying, I'm curious. So the Morgul blades, were those forged by Sauron, or are they cursed blades from the Ringwraith's respective realms? Don't think we've got a categorical answer on this one, but the fact that they're called Morgul blades implies that they come from Minas Morgul, and that was the home base of, for hundreds of years, of the Witch King and the Nazgul. So my instinct is that this is a Ringwraith thing. This is a Nazgul thing. We know that we'll talk about the Barrow-wights a bit later, but we know that the Witch King did have a way of sort of creating wraiths of his own. So that kind of magic was definitely something that he did have. So there was no particular need for Sauron to do this. If Sauron had created this or invented this, then this would have been specifically for them and their use. So don't think I've seen it specifically said anywhere, but yeah, my guess is probably the Witch King himself. Right, let's go back to a question from where we got up to. Sean Gartland saying, "Hi there, comrade. Hope all is well. Thank you very much. No question from me, but a mini rant. I think this is the one character that the movies just don't know what to do with. Aragorn kicks his tushy on Weathertop with nary a scratch. He then scares the bejesus out of Gandalf at Minas Tirith and destroys his staff with apparent ease, and then just sits there like a plank whilst Eowyn monologues before spearing him through the face. Some decent cinematic moments, but no internal logic at all." End rant. Yeah, so I will happily react to that. I mean, I wouldn't disagree that they didn't necessarily know how they're going to use him. What they did, and I understand it, was that they made Sauron himself more of a presence than he is in the book. By which I mean we've got that great eye that is there seemingly all the time. It keeps on flashing up here, there, all over the place, which I thought worked really in cinematic kind of feel. That worked really well. Sauron is looking out over everything. He's always there, etc. What that meant was that he then became more of a presence. So the literary need for the Witch King to be this kind of representation of his evil in the world was slightly lessened. So that, I think, is why they weren't 100% sure what to do with him. As for sort of power levels, he should be up and down a little bit, as we mentioned before. He should be more powerful in the dark. During the battle, the siege of Minas Tirith, he should be more powerful because Sauron's given him that kind of power up, that extra demonic force. So there should be different levels. However, him breaking Gandalf's staff, I did a video very recently about Gandalf's staff. If you're interested, that was not in his power to break Gandalf's staff. And the Weathertop thing, I don't think they made it as obvious, but the point is that they withdrew. That was their decision. They thought they'd got their victory. So it wasn't, as I say, they didn't really show it. They wanted to show Aragorn being heroic rather than the Nazgul making a strategic withdrawal. So yeah, they didn't. I don't think they got all of the beats of that right. But I kind of understand why. Martin S. What I said earlier about crossovers was mostly about contradictory magic rule sets rather than magic versus the mundane or the mundane versus the mundane. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So that's certainly how I interpreted it. Thank you for that clarification. No, yeah, so different magical rules in different areas. So would the would Valyrian steel work on the Witch King? Would a blade of Westerness work on the others? Exactly. The authors themselves are the only ones who are in charge of their own law, and they get to decide these things in their own world, but not in other people's worlds. Let's go. Casey Robinson, aka the Shaky Shooter. Thank you very much for those nice words there in the chat. Let's go to a question from Sir Steve the O, saying, "Hello there, good people. Two questions, one quick, one not so quick. First, the quick one, I think. When did the Witch King become prominent or present in Middle Earth? I'm not sure I recall any Second Age mentions. Well, I think I've covered this one off, but just very briefly. Second Age, no. We get mentions of the Nazgul appearing, but Sauron is still at that point. He's doing his own thing. He has control of these guys now, but he's not using them as uh, his workers out in the field because he wants to do it himself. His cunning plan, and Sauron is very hands-on in the Second Age. He goes out, he forges the rings of power, he leads his armies out into the world. He's the one who goes to Numenor and tempts them down the wrong path. He doesn't sort of delegate these tasks off to his Nazgul. That's more stuff that he does in the Third Age. So yes, it is only with the around the year 1300 or so when the Witch King starts gathering evil to himself up in Angmar. That's when he starts making an impression. The longer question. I'm loath to refer to the Hobbit movies as a reference point for canon, but something I never quite understood. There is a scene where Gandalf is exploring what appears to be a tomb or dungeon of sorts, which has empty cells that seem to have been broken out of. I think that was supposed to be a prison for the Nazgul. I'm really sure it's not part of the actual canon, but is this supposed to be referring to something in the Legendarium? Would there be a period somewhere between being human and being a wraith that they were imprisoned in some sort of form? So the short answer to this, to the longer question, is no. That's a complete invention for the movies. What I think they were trying to do was they wanted to make that gap in the middle of the story when Gandalf gets them to the edge of Mirkwood and they says, "Oh, I've got something else I've got to be going off and doing." And we know that what Gandalf was going off to do was to attack Sauron in Mirkwood and Dol Guldur, but that isn't really the focus of what happens in the book because we're following Bilbo. And in order to have some kind of impact, they've felt, I think, that they needed a bit of a build up to this, to Gandalf realizing this is Sauron, guys. Sauron's back. And in reality, in the books, that process took best part of 2,000 years before he actually knew for sure and had managed to persuade the White Council that they should go in. That was a very long process. They couldn't show that very long process in the film, so what they decided to do was they would show there's some Radagast sees evil going on in Mirkwood. That evil had been in Mirkwood for a long time by then, but they showed it, and he's like, "Oh no, there's something going on in Mirkwood." They kind of time compressed that, and then they also wanted Gandalf discovering a thing, and the thing that he discovered was, the Ringwraiths. They've escaped from their prison. The prison never happened. The Ringwraiths kind of disappeared at the end of the Second Age with Sauron's downfall, and then, but they'd not died. because the ring was still there, and their fates were tied in with the ring, and so they still hung around. So they just emerged later. The way the film wanted to do the shortcut to kind of show Sauron is back, bad things are about to happen. Let's have him calling the ring wraiths back to himself. And how do we show that dramatically? Well, let's have them breaking out of a prison. So that's what that was about. And then you did your sneak question, Nazgul versus an other. Who's your silver stags on? I think I've answered this one from a few other questions, but yeah, this really does depend on how the magic systems align. Martin S, thank you, very generous of the super chats today, saying if Aula, who is the Valor Smith, crafted the greatest battering ram he could for 75 mortal men from Mithril with defenses against hot oil and magic, and it made its way to a Song of Ice and Fire, how much would it be worth with powers known? A lot. It's probably the way. So the for the size of this, I think, is the main thing. The idea that this is an astonishingly good battering ram would be impressive in its way. The defenses against hot oil and magic would be very impressive. But if it is a battering ram for 75 mortal men, as in, I think what you mean is could be operated by 75 mortal men made out of mithril. You don't have mithril in Westeros, but in terms of what mithril is worth in Middle-earth, that mithril shirt that Bilbo had, Gandalf sort of says he didn't know, but it was probably worth more than the Shire. And that's just one mithril shirt. A huge battering ram made out of mithril would be unimaginable. The GDP of Westeros would be sort of my my observation. Sorry, I just laughed. Northern Tommy saying "Hot Oil and Magic" sounds like a very early Red Hot Chili Peppers album. Yeah, it does a bit. Martin S, I've got a question for you over here. This is from over here, being from a Patreon. I was wondering where you think the Witch King got his aptitude for sorcery and necromancy from. I'm considering three potential sources. Firstly, his own talents. He was probably Númenórean, quite possibly a son of the royal house, descending from Elros, though that is unproven. Two, the Ring of Men, one of the 9, which he got from Sauron. Or 3, from Sauron directly via the link established through 2 and Sauron's One Ring. 2 and 3 are causally connected, but separate, I think. He seemed notably more potent than the other Nazgul, almost like a restricted Maya in some ways. Well, I'll get onto the restricted Maya in more detail a bit later, because there is a development of Tolkien's thinking about this character over time as he is writing The Lord of the Rings. And for a reasonable period of time, Tolkien did think of him as another Maya. So there will be kind of hangovers from that to a degree within the text. But where he ended up was that this is definitely a man, a human. I agree, a Númenórean. I agree, probably somebody from the royal line. So that means that in the same way that even someone that you wouldn't count as being a sorcerer of any kind, but is from the royal line, like Aragorn, is low-key magical. In that Aragorn, he's long lived. He's also got healing hands, and quite a few other. He's got precognition abilities. He, as a random example, just before they're going into Moria, he kind of gives Gandalf this rather sonorous exhortation that if you go into there, I'm talking to you now, Gandalf. I just have this feeling if you go into there, beware. So he's got a lot of low key magic going on, has Aragorn. So yes, I think probably there is that element of that. Is that probably he was naturally predisposed. Yes, the ring becoming a Nazgul also added a layer of magic. And yes, I suspect Sauron might have taught him a few things, but he, I think, the biggest element of this is he is in every kind of iteration of Tolkien's thinking. He was a sorcerer. He was a magic user beforehand, and he will have trained in magical arts. Magic obviously does exist in this world. It's not all kind of elf magic moving with nature, etc. There are spells. Even Gandalf talks about, I have learned spells about these kinds of things. So you can, if you've got some kind of a natural disposition, which he probably did, then you can train yourself to be a magic user. And what the Rings of Power tend to do is to amplify your natural abilities to make you more powerful. So if you're already a powerful sorcerer, you become an even more powerful sorcerer. So that's, I think, what we're talking about: natural ability, then training themselves to become a magic user, and then their powers being amplified by the power of the ring. Possibly an extra element of Sauron himself helping out. Martin S. saying, I'll talk about the battering ram. I meant how the Westerosi lords would value their Aulur ram, mithril aside. Anyway, what if Stannis had it and it didn't sink through Tyrion's wildfire? Okay, yes. So how they would value it, not in terms of sort of just cash. Yeah, they would view it as one of the wonders of the world, I suspect, if it were like that. The Maesters would probably not like a obviously magical thing, but the lords would definitely wish to use it. With Stannis, if he'd managed to get it to King's Landing, then yeah, he'd have used it, and yes, he would have got through the gates. The fact of the matter is actually probably they would have, by climbing over and through normal battering rams, they would have got in anyway. They completely outnumbered the defenders of King's Landing at the time. I mean, it's not really talked about all that much, but when Tyrion is coming up with all of these crazy ideas with chains and wildfire and all the rest of it, this is to disguise, or not to disguise, but this is at least partly because of the fact that they simply don't have many people defending the city, and those that they do have, gold cloaks, they're more, they're city watch. They're not actually trained soldiers. The Lannister army is out in out fighting with Tywin. The Baratheon army that had been there, they've headed off with so Stannis and Renly. The Tyrells haven't arrived yet. The Starks who were there, they've got rid of. So actually, there's not all that many people defending King's Landing. So if Tywin had not arrived with the Tyrells when he did, there's every chance that even with the damage and devastation that happened, they would have taken King's Landing. Ranebe Mitra saying, salutations, Robert and Dan the dog. Much love to you both, including fellow Patreon members and the mods. Belated congratulations on 900k subscribers on the main channel. Really hope 2026 is the year to reach 1 million, with lots of things all coming up this year. Yes, so we've got Knight of the Seven Kingdoms coming in January, House of the Dragon Season 3 probably June, Rings of Power Season 3, I think they're finishing filming soon, so maybe at the end of next year. We've also got, in case you missed it, in about a week's time, we've got The Witcher Season 4 coming out. So lots of things happening over the next year. And thank you for, 900k. I hit that maybe a month ago, something like that. We're now, I don't know, 910,000, something like that. Fingers crossed. Let's not jinx things, but yes, 1 million certainly seems possible and would be amazing. Have you come across this draft in the history of Middle-earth around the Witch King's alternate background? Yes, I've been sort of trailing this for a while. Called The Wizard King of Numenor. It's where Gandalf explains to us that this wraith was once a Maiar and even held great power in Numenor, eventually falling under Sauron. I believe the Rings of Power is leaning into this origin for Ciarán Hinds' character, i.e. the Dark Wizard in the East. Why do you believe this plotline was abandoned by Tolkien? Well, so let's explain what this is, the Wizard King. The concept of the Witch King did change over time. And so we have early drafts. So the History of Middle-earth, for those who don't know, it's this 12-volume set of books that contains Tolkien's random related writings. It's probably the best way of saying it, in the world of Middle-earth, in the wider legendarium, edited by Christopher Tolkien, often with him providing sort of editorial comment as you're going along. So that's what we've got. And as a part of this, in some of those books, we get bits of information about the development of the Lord of the Rings, early drafts, what was there, what wasn't there. This is part of how we get to learn about early names for a lot of these characters. And yes, in this, we certainly, when we get to the Council of Elrond, then we get the Wizard King of Angmar, and we get Gandalf. He says, yeah, he was one of my order of the Astari, so he's a Maiar, and he fell. And this name, the Wizard King, sort of seems to survive all the way through to really quite late drafts, it has to be said. And when he was writing the last few chapters, then you'll find that he, the original plan was he would survive the siege of Minas Tirith. He would be the person who was there as the mouth of Sauron, or alternatively, he survived right to the very end, and the ring is destroyed, and Frodo and Sam are about to leave, or Frodo's about to leave, and then he appears as this like baddie, just like saying, "Haha, you'll never leave here alive after all you've done, and now we're all going to die together." And then I think in one of these drafts, Sam stabs him in the back and kills him with Sting, one presumes. So, yeah, there was a completely different idea going on there for quite some time. And eventually he shifts around to the version we have now. One of the... Oh, fun fact, let's put it this way. Fun fact is, in the main body of The Lord of the Rings, the Witch King isn't ever called the Witch King. He is called lots of things. The Lord of Minas Morgul. What else is he? The Dreadful King. The Captain of Minas Morgul. The Lord of the Nazgul. He's called lots of these different things. We're calling him the Witch King Angmar. He's called that a lot when you get to the appendices, which, if you remember, Tolkien drew together after he'd finished The Lord of the Rings, and he'd sent that off to the publishers, and there was quite a lot of toing and froing to do with paper shortages and lots of other things. But he was trying to push for it to be published alongside a Proto-Silmarillion. They said, we're not doing that. He eventually got agreement to do a cut-down version, which we know as the appendices, attached to the Return of the King. And so in that's where we get this Witch King concept coming through most clearly. So yes, he was, I mean, he sort of shifted over time as a character, but certainly for a long period of time, then it appears that he was the Wizard King, and then who also was potentially also a Maya. Why? Well, first of all, what about the Rings of Power? Are they leaning into this for the Dark Wizard in the East? Possibly. I'll be honest, I don't know where they're going now with that. They gave very, very, very strong Saruman hints last season, that character was Saruman. Whether they go with that, I think, is another thing entirely. If they do, calling Gandalf old friend seems to imply that he must be a Maya. Maybe that means that they're going to try and say that, yeah, if does that person then become one of the ring wraiths? Personally, I wouldn't like it, because Tolkien decided that he wanted to go with all of the ring wraiths being human. Why did he decide to do that? Well, we're not given an absolute answer by Tolkien on this one, but I think he wanted to show the corrupting power of the ring on humans, because this is, for all of the other things going on, this is a human story. This is, we've got these rings go to the elves, those rings go to the dwarves, these rings go to the humans, except for one of them which doesn't. It doesn't kind of work together all that well. So he wanted to show that that's what happens to humans, because we are fallen and we are corruptible and we're greedy and power hungry and all of the bad things. So that, I think, is where he's going. I think it's a good decision. I think that it would have been a little bit of power creep if we had another Maya there, who was, and it would, I think, unbalance the Sauron, for me, the Sauron Witch King dynamic, if the Witch King was actually a Maya, so on the same kind of, not power level, but sort of power grouping, as Sauron, and yet Sauron is in this weakened form, and um, the Witch King isn't. So yeah, it doesn't quite. It doesn't quite. I think it was the right decision on Tolkien's part, to make this about human frailty. Let's go to Yeldanil, saying, "Hi, Robert. A somewhat silly question, perhaps. No such thing as a silly question. Well, there is such a thing as a silly question. This is not a silly question. The character's title of The Witch King, that implies there is a concept of witches during his lifetime. But in the main story, we see that people are familiar with wizards, evil or not, but there's, as far as I recall, no mention of witches. What does this title mean within the world of Middle-earth, and why not call him an evil wizard king or something in that vein?" So, yeah, so he was originally the Wizard King. That was the idea, that he was the Wizard King. But in changing his status, because the wizards, the Astari, the wizards, he, I think, felt, I'm not going to keep him with that same name. If I'm making a human, then he's not like associated with the wizards. So he went with something else. He could have done Sorcerer King. And in fact, I think at one point he is mentioned as Sorcerer King. But he obviously went with Witch King. Now, Tolkien, philologist, always goes back to sort of the meaning of words and where they come from. And whereas we think of witches probably sort of like a female magic user, that female element was not, and when you get to the root of the word, is not necessarily there. It comes from, and at least the modern pronunciation of it is Wicca, which is obviously where we get sort of magic from. And so a witch, in the more original form of what it meant, was somebody who uses magic, not necessarily, and with a kind of an implication of mistrust and we don't like this person. I think it rolls off, personally, I think it rolls off the tongue really well, Witch King. I think that works particularly well. But yeah, I think there was another point I was going to make. I can't remember what it was. It'll come back to me. Buttoned up reader saying, "Does the Witch King wear boxers or briefs?" Neither. Which makes me sound like that. But the point is they're invisible. Most of the time, you don't see them at all. The robes are just a thing going over the top. When he sort of takes the top cowl thing off, he's got a crown on, but there's nothing. There's no head there. So I think it's fair to say that if you're entirely invisible and incorporeal, then your need for undergarments is relatively limited. Let's put it that way. Jordan Clark saying, like Wiccan. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, everyone, yeah, the Witch King goes commando. Let's not get that trending. Let's go to a question from Renabir Mitra. We have Sauron being called a necromancer, but all instances of necromancy in the text are attributed to the Witch King, referring to the Barrow-wights here. My personal headcanon here is that the Witch King gained this ability from Sauron. Have you come across any instances of necromancy in the wider text that get attributed to Sauron or maybe Morgoth, such as this power magic can eventually get passed on down to the Witch King? Okay, I actually get asked this quite a few. I might do a video. Is Sauron really a necromancer? Because a lot of people actually ask this. So, I think the answer is yes. That Sauron is a necromancer. I think Tolkien again uses that in the older sense of it's not just about animating dead bodies or anything like that, but this is about dark magic. And particularly, but not only connected into sort of wraiths and dead spirits and things along those lines. So that, I think, is the feeling we've got going on there, first of all. But in terms of have we got any evidence that Sauron ever did this? Well, I mean, the first thing is he created ring wraiths. These are undead. They are invisible beings who exist on the spiritual plane, but are tied to our plane. So that's an absolute fundamental identification of him doing this kind of like spirit sorcery. But there's at least one other clear example, I think. If you go back into the First Age, when he was the chief lieutenant to Morgoth, he was very associated with wolves, and he had werewolves. And these were, we're told, wolves that were inhabited by dreadful spirits. So he took a spirit from somewhere and he put it into the wolf. So again, this is magic working with these spirits. He is described in the Silmarillion as, get this right, master of shadows and of phantoms. So again, we're getting this kind of spirits, this kind of ghostly idea of what his powers were. I think there's also one other example that we have in the Lord of the Rings. You may remember in the books, they didn't really get. I mean, they showed it, but they didn't really make a big thing of it. In Cirith Ungol, in the way into Mordor, there were the two Watchers. Now, the two Watchers is fascinating. They're never really explained. But there's these sort of big statues with these three faces, and they're an alarm system, a magical alarm system that kind of shriek out if an enemy's going by. We're told that they Again, the quote is, "They were inhabited by some dreadful spirit of evil vigilance." So again, we've got spirits going on here. Sauron binding spirits in some way. So I think the short answer is yes. Sauron clearly, his one of the things that he did that he was particularly specialist in was binding spirits to places that they otherwise wouldn't be. Reflective rambling. Impending inspiration can this is picking up a question for impending inspiration. Thank you very much. Can resonance be used in understanding spells and magic in Lord of the Rings? I.e., sounds resonate with nature to produce certain phenomena. That's an interesting question. I'm just trying to think if I can think of any examples. Uh, off the top of my head, I can't think of any specific examples of magic that does that. But there is all of the oh no, actually, obvious example, Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil sings all the time, and his songs are what his magic seems to work their way through. Old Man Willow, he sings to Old Man Willow to release the hobbits. He sings to the Barrow Wight. So this is song resounding out, bringing about sort of the outcome that Tom is wanting. Now, a lot of people make the link across to what I was going to say is the kind of the meta answer here, which is that all of creation in some way was sung into existence. We have the Song of the Ainur right at the very beginning of the Silmarillion. How did all of this happen? Well, the Ainur, which is the Valar and the Maiar, they were basically Iluvatar, the one god, conducted them, and they sang. And as they sang, they each knew parts of this great creation of what was in Iluvatar's mind, and they were singing it, and it was appearing there before them. And although the actual creation came from Iluvatar, it was this act of singing, which is this kind of starting point for creation. It's very similar. C.S. Lewis does a very similar thing in The Magician's Nephew, which, if you're interested, the film, they are Greta Gerwig is directing it, and they are filming it now. We've seen a few sort of shots of them filming out in London and elsewhere, and it seems to be set a few decades later than The Magician's Nephew actually is. But it's not Narnia stream. We could talk about that another time. The point is that it's the song, and therefore the kind of the resonance, if you like, which is at the heart of creation, and this kind of echoes with Tom himself seems to be in. You can describe Tom in many ways, but this reflection of the music of the Ainur is, I think, quite a powerful way of understanding him. Interesting question. Willie Biggs 2000. Could Elric of Melniboné, which when I read the Elric stories many years ago, I pronounced it in my head as a Melnibone, which it may be, but I've been told sure, since then it's Melniboné. Could he join the content in 2026 on the channel? Well, I always take a little bit of time off over sort of Christmas time, have a think about what I'm going to do next year in the next year. So I'm never say never. I think probably not. Although in my mind, I do like the idea of doing. I've done a few times. You may have seen them videos like an introduction to. Did one to an introduction to the Wheel of Time, to Dune, to a couple of other things, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I did wonder whether or not I might do something similar to book series, and just to sort of do an introduction to a particular book series. It's just an idea. Whether I find time to do that is a different thing. Let's Melnibone, says Carl Karsnark, who's usually right about these things. Thank you. So let's go to Andrew Weir saying, "Hello, Robert. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you. You've rekindled my interest in worlds I thought I was done with, and that has brought me much joy." Well, that brings me much joy to know that that is the case. So one thing here that you perhaps took for granted, now might look odd under the microscope, is the role of the Nazgul, and especially the Witch King. How would they play in the wider story? Both before and after Book One of The Lord of the Rings, the Witch King is a military general and presumably an important political figure, while during Book One, he takes on the role of a bounty hunter leading a small band of investigative scouts discreetly combing the countryside. In most stories, this would feel like a demotion from a big bad leader archetype to a roguish minion archetype. Yet somehow Tolkien makes it feel completely normal that one character should fit both roles, and I, for one, find his presence in Book One a whole lot larger than in Book Five. Does this seem unique and peculiar to you as well? Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I think it's deliberate. For me, the thing which I think I marvel at as I see the story develop with the eyes of somebody who's perhaps not read it before, is the way that you're then, if not encouraged, but allowed to look back and realize how much danger the hobbits were in to start with. You knew that this was bad at the time. These Black Riders, they seem they seem big and scary. They're chasing them, the hobbits around, but we didn't know quite how big and scary they were until later on, and it kind of gets. We learn a little bit from Aragorn. We learn a little bit from Council of Elrond. Then when we sort of like each time we're like getting more, and by the end of it, we're seeing the Witch King himself blasting down the doors of Minas Tirith, striding through, and he's the height of hubris, and he's like sort of saying, "Can you not see death himself?" Basically, say, "I am death," and it's like that is the person who was chasing Frodo way back at the beginning, and it's an incredibly powerful narrative tool to allow you to look back and go, "Wow, now I understand." And it's one of those things where you know a good book when you enjoy reading it even more the second time. And I can't remember who it was. It might have been Tolkien, might have been Lewis. It's one of them who waxes lyrical on this, as saying you can get lots of books can be good on a first read. They can have shocking twists and turns. They can keep you on the edge of a seat. They can be real thrillers. The trick is a book that you love as much, if not more, on the second read through. Once you know what's going to happen, once the immediate shock value has gone, once the oh no, what's going to happen, and you go back and you're appreciating the craft of the story and the craft of the characters and the craft of how this was all put together. That's the mark of a really good story, and that for me is this is a part of that, is that we can look back and actually we get an extra layer to our understanding of what's going on. Martin S. saying, "The Witch King and the Nazgul are agents of Sauron in whatever capacity Sauron needs or wills the most at that moment," is my rough take on it. Yeah, I'd agree with that until I was going more sort of literary route, but I think that's the correct answer, is that the early part, middle part of the Third Age, the big issue was how do we get rid of Arnor and diminish Gondor, and that's the Witch King was playing that role. When we get to this point, the most important thing is finding that One Ring, and who does he trust to do that? These guys here. D.M. Collins saying, why doesn't the Witch King just constantly break everyone's swords with his mind like he does to Frodo at the Forge? Does he need a breather first? Yeah, so he breaks the sword just by kind of looking at it. So we'll cut back first to Tolkien's legendary soft magic system. We don't know the details of exactly how these things work. However, yes, doing hardcore magic does seem to drain you in a way. You get Gandalf, who, when he casts, when he's in Moria, and he casts the spell, kind of a lock spell, effectively, or a shield spell over the door, while the Fellowship are all escaping, and then the Balrog kind of blasts it out the way, and he kind of like falls down the stairs. He says, "I'm, you know, I'm run out of energy." I mean, he's still moving, so he's not like himself physically hurt, but he can no longer be doing magic. He says, "We'll have to do without light. I can't cast a light spell right now." So that it's very clear that yes, if you're using big magic, then that does drain you. So that's entirely possible that that's what that is. The fact of the matter is that the Witch King doesn't actually, his fighting with swords isn't really his main means of sort of fighting and winning. He's got the sense of fear that goes before him. People scatter before they get within striking range. The Black Breath knocks people out and kills them a lot of the time. Yeah, there's a huge amount of things. If he was then coming at somebody and they somehow managed to survive all of this, and he wanted to then stab her with his Morgul blade, then yeah, I could well imagine he might use that ability again. But the ability to sort of shatter a sword, most of the time he didn't need to use it. He is the the fact is with the Witch King is that he comes up against in this story Glorfindel and Gandalf, and sort of looks a bit second best, which does make us kind of think, he's not maybe that powerful. For the vast majority of his time in Middle Earth, he is the most powerful being in any room he's in. So whoever he faces as a human opposition, they've got no chance against him. Let's go to Chitara in the chat saying, I do think that the one thing the films did badly was the sense of fear of the Nazgul and the Witch King. Yeah, they didn't show that so much, I don't think. Let's go to a question from Taylor Jones saying, hi, Robert. It is said the Witch King sent the Barrow-wights to the Barrow Downs, presumably called something else before that, or it's just wildly pessimistic. Do you think the Barrow-wights were something the Witch King created or raised with his own power? Or were these some pre-existing evil he simply had authority over? I only recently learned that in the early drafts he was called the Wizard King, and Gandalf calls him a fallen member of his own order, which I couldn't work into a question, but it's neat. Well, yeah, I think I've covered that one off a moment or so ago. But the Barrow-wights. So you sort of said in passing about the Barrow Downs. Were they always called the Barrow Downs? Yes, they were. But that's not a bad thing. So the barrows are sort of graves, which sort of like a hollow mound, and if you wonder, this Tolkien will have, I'm sure, got inspiration from this, but dotted around England, then there's lots of these. You can call them a tumuli around Salisbury Plain, near to Stonehenge. If you're just driving down the A303, if you know it, the main road that goes near Stonehenge, and you just look left and right, you can see lots of them just dotted about, these sort of mounds in the ground. And these aren't scary, they're not bad, they're just this. In fact, they're ways of honoring heroes and ancestors of old. So it was called the Barrow Downs, but that wasn't a bad thing, to the extent that when the Dunedain of Cardolan, they went to hide. The Witch King was waging war against them, and they went to hide in a corner of their lands. They went to hide in the Barrow Downs, not because it wasn't scary. There weren't any wights there. There was nothing bad there. This was just, it's just like this sort of hilly area. So um, that was before the Barrow Wights, and then we're told, yes, that the Witch King sent the Barrow Wights to basically get rid of the Dunedain from there. He sent them to infest the Barrow Downs, and so they did. And yes, they seem to be created by him. They were sent from Angmar, we're told. We're not told. The implication is that these are spirits from something, which are they orcs, are they humans, elves, whatever, where they are in the same kind of way that we've been talking about the ring wraiths, human body which is basically gone, and they're now a wraith bound to this earth in some way. The same way that werewolves were wolves, which had these spirits bound into them, and so on. That seems to be the way that you get this spirit from somewhere. You cannot create it out of nowhere. It has to come from somewhere, and then you control that spirit and bind it to something. And that's what he did. He bound those spirits to the Barrowlands, and sort of infused them with evil energy to take on the Dunedain. Now, this does give me the chance to go off on one of my favourite personal theories, that headcanon. We were talking about headcanon last time. The Barrow Wights, whenever we read about them, one of the things we're told about as a description is they have rings. They wear rings. So it sort of harks back to a question we had a moment ago. Did the Witch King gain his knowledge and spells and magic from Sauron in some way? I think in this he probably did. The fact that our attention is drawn to these rings a lot in the poem, in Tom Bombadil Goes Boating, I think it is, and in The Lord of the Rings, we're told our attention is drawn to the jangling rings. So that's clearly a thing, and this echoes clearly the idea of the ring wraiths themselves. They used the power of Sauron used the power of the ring to be binding them, and so that sounds like the Witch King used the power of these other smaller rings to be binding these spirits. Okay, so I think that answers your question. Yes, he created them, but he didn't create them out of nothing. He will have taken spirits from somewhere and infused them with his evil energy and bound them to this world. Kira Adele saying, "Hi, Robert. Not a specific question. I'm sure you'll talk about it anyway, but I'd love to hear more about the prophecy about the Witch King's defeat and how you interpret it." Okay, so I mentioned this in passing at the very beginning of the stream, but said I would talk about it a little bit more. So the situation is, this is way back in time, at the end of the Angmar Wars. So the Witch King thinks he's won, but he's defeated all three of the kingdoms of the north. But then forces of good mass together an army. They go and attack him. He comes out to meet them on the field of battle. He's clearly underestimated his opposition. They rout his forces. He's left. he charges at the king of Gondor, Eanor, whose horse bolts. He laughs because that's a thing that the king, mocking laugh, that's a thing that the Witch King does. Then he sees Glorfindel, who sort of comes up there in his white horse, and it's like, okay, this is too much. I'm out of here. And he heads off. Eanor has got control of his horse again and is heading back and is about to go charging after the Witch King because he's now annoyed and quite embarrassed that the Witch King charged before him and he just headed off. And Glorfindel puts out his hand and stops him. And he said he will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. So that's what Glorfindel says. Now, what I think is interesting. I think there's a few elements of this which are interesting. We often talk about this as a prophecy. Tolkien he has very hazy lines between foresight, prophecy, curse, blessing, doom. These things kind of all morph into one. So what we've got here is the way it's written, and I'll quickly read it again. When he says, he will not return to this land, far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. Full stop. And it's actually spoken as kind of like a statement of fact. Glorfindel is there. He just knows this. He's not coming back. And he is going to survive for some time. There's no point in us chasing him. And even if you did go there, not by the hand of man will he fall. So it's almost like a statement. And what I find interesting is if you then fast forward, this clearly has become knowledge. Everyone went, okay, Glorfindel said that. Sounds kind of important. It gets passed down, gets spread around. Gandalf knows about it, and various other people know about it, and the Witch King himself seems to know about this. Someone's told him. The extent to which, when the showdown happens, that leads to his death, he comes sort of crashing down, and he's not focused. The fact that Eowyn and Merry are there is neither here nor there to him. That's not what he's focused on. He's focused on Theoden, and he comes down, and basically Theoden's horse falls on him, and the Witch King is there to do the killing blow. At which point, Eowyn, dressed as Dernhelm, gets in the way and sort of says, you're not coming past me. And then the Witch King, this is the hubris comes again. And he says, no living man may hinder me, which I find a wonderful bit of writing, because what he has done is he's taken a statement of fact about what his death is going to be like. He will die not by the hand of man. And then he says, no living man can hinder me. He's expanded it out to sort of say, you can't even hinder me. It's not about my death. This is about that. And it's also not a prophecy, a foresight about his death. It's an affirmation of how powerful and important he is, and nobody can get in his way. So he has completely twisted this around the wrong way. Which means that he's completely blindsided to what it actually means, until she takes off the helmet and he says, I am no man. And that's the line she says in the film. But that's the moment when he actually pauses, and for a moment you see fear in his eyes. It's almost as if he goes, okay, I hadn't thought about that bit. So this is the hubris that's there, and he kind of twists this around. And this is the thing that I think Tolkien wishes us to see is that he is there. He has his crowning moment, his greatest moment, when he strides through the gates of Minas Tirith, something that he probably has been thinking about doing for hundreds of years by this point. He thinks that's the hardest bit. That gate was a famous gate. Nobody could get through that gate. I got through it Grond 3 times, bang, gone. I'm through. Somebody's there trying to oppose him, and he says, look at me, I am death. And he goes and he takes down the king of this other force, and he's there. Nobody can stop me. He has this great hubris moment, and then just in his last seconds, Tolkien shows us this kind of fear, this realization just before Merry stabs him, and then obviously Eowyn stabs him. Right. I hope that answers that one for you. Paris Ballerina. So what happens to the Whites when the Witch King is killed? If they survive that, do they survive the destruction of the ring? No. So they are all individually bound to the ring through their ring. And the Witch King being killed is because he has specifically been killed by the sword which Merry has, which was forged way ago during the Angmar Wars as a way to sever the link effectively between a white, a wraith, and the mortal world. And that's what happens. It's not Merry didn't physically damage him in some huge way, but by stabbing the sword, the magic effect was released, and what was binding him there was broken, which meant that then Eowyn could sort of stab him. And he would be kind of vanquished. That did not affect the other rings. I mean, I'm sure they were affected by their commander being destroyed, but they still had power, and they were still bound to the One Ring. In fact, we see them right at the end when you get the final battle. Aragorn's led his forces there up in front of the Black Gate. You get the Nazgul, the remaining Nazgul, on their fell beasts, kind of swirling around, and they're starting to come swooping in and attack. And then the eagles arrive, and then they take on each other. And then at the last minute, when Sauron realizes what's going on, when Frodo puts on the One Ring, it's like, what? Somebody put on the ring there? And then the 8 fly back as fast as they can towards Aldruin. So they are all individually linked into the One Ring, not en masse as a whole, if that makes sense. Let's go to a question from well, in fact, before I get to a question, moderators, thank you. You do a fantastic job there. I think I saw somebody praising you in the chat. You do an amazing job in this chat. If you are here in the chat, and the reason why it's filled with interesting discussion, uplifting talk, and no spam bots, and hopefully no abuse. That's because the moderators are excellent. They're really genuinely wonderful. So if you could show them a little bit of love if you're watching this live, I would hugely appreciate it. Let's go to Carlos Ballerina saying, I didn't mean the wraiths, I meant the Barrow Whites. Oh, okay, sorry, I misinterpreted your question. So what happens to the Barrow Whites when the Witch King is killed? If they survive that, do they survive the destruction of the ring? It's not a question I think Tolkien answers off the top of my head. If the magic is the same, that it's a connection between the connection between the Witch King and the Barrow Wights is the same as the connection between Sauron and the Nazgul, then yes, logically, I think that is what happens. But they're not a danger going forward, I think, is the short answer, because they will, in any event, although it perhaps wasn't the most pleasant of places, they after the whole Angmar Wars, and right up to the start of the Lord of the Rings, they were resting basically. And the witch is often missed, but the Witch King deliberately goes through there and actually spends, I think, 3 days in the Barrowlands, rousing them once more, magically rousing them once more, just to add to the defenses. Nobody's coming through. Anyway, he was right. Nobody's coming through here without the Barrow-wights capturing them. Okay, let's go to Lorelei Drag. Oh, that's actually, I think that was my last question specifically on the Witch King. Now is a good time to drop um, any more questions about the Witch King into the chat. I just spotted one here, impending inspiration, saying, what happened to the Witch King's ring before being rendered useless? So, as best as we can understand it, Sauron, actually having used the rings to bind the ring wraiths to him, he gathered their rings and kept them all in Barad-dûr. So that's where they were. Barad-dûr, having been built through the power of the One Ring, when the One Ring was destroyed, Barad-dûr, the great Black Tower, that all came crashing down, and those rings were destroyed. So that's what happened to them. Let's go to Lorelei Dragon, saying, not a question really, but I'm wondering if you've seen Christopher Claflin's channel on YouTube. It's the kind of nerdy detail that I think you might enjoy. He's posted a video today making a scale model of the Battle of Helm's Deep. Well, I have not seen it, but I will happily shout out thing. Sounds like the kind of thing I'd like. I've not watched it, so I can't give a personal recommendation, but happy very much to pass on recommendation from others. That's Christopher Claflin. I think I might have seen a short from him with scale models of stuff. I think, did he do a scale model of Westeros and one of Middle Earth? Possibly. If so, it's excellent. So Adam Geets saying, hi Robert, you can answer this next week if you're only taking Lord of the Rings questions. At the end of my streams, just so people know, I try and keep the first part of the stream about the specific topic that we're talking about, but then at the end, then yeah, I'll take questions on other things that I cover as well. So after listening to the video on headcanon, I started thinking about the Starks. Throughout A Song of Ice and Fire, they've been portrayed as honourable and loyal. They are a good family. George R. Martin doesn't write good and bad, only grey. I was thinking maybe the ancient Starks did something terrible and now have to pay the price for it. Perhaps an ancient Stark, probably a Brandon, helped to create the White Walkers, and that's why they are literally tied to Winterfell. Their deceased are not free. Their souls have to stay at Winterfell to help out next in the long night. Help out in the next long night. Yeah, so I like the thinking there. I think last week I did trail at the end of it that I was going to be doing a video on this sort of subject. And I have just written that, so that will appear at some point in the next week or two. So yeah, for those who kind of missed it, I've done a few videos. It's been quite a long series, not in terms of lots of videos, but I took a few breaks in the middle of doing it, about the Starks and Winterfell and all of that kind of the crypts and all of that kind of jazz. And this was a sort of an attempt to sort of answer the "but why" question, which is, why are the Starks bound there? What's the purpose? Because you're right, this doesn't feel like a blessing to them. When you actually get down to the Stark spirits, the Lord of the Starks, each generation, the King of Winter, when they die, their spirit doesn't fly free to wherever it goes. It gets taken down into the Winterfell crypts and is bound there. And these are the words that are used, and they're called vengeful spirits. They don't seem happy about this. When people head down to the crypts, they're being judged. The thoughts are not nice thoughts. The legends are about the sword across their laps that is to bind in their spirit. So it's not like a nice idea. This is but given the fact that the crypts are incredibly deep and they started filling them up from the bottom upwards, the clear idea was this is going to happen for thousands of years worth of Starks, their spirits being bound into this place. It follows for me that it might therefore not be a blessing to them, but a curse to them, or a punishment in some way, for something that's they've perhaps done wrong in the past. Now, that's probably enough spoiler of that one video. I always spoil my videos. I was speculating on the other. In fact, the video title was The Night's King, a Stark. That was my starting point for it. But the idea that they might have been involved in the creation of the White Walkers, the others in some way, yeah, that would kind of work. Let's go to Caius Ballerina in the chat. Saying part one in the versions of the creation of the dwarves. Oh, this is part one of a question. In the versions of the creation of the dwarves, one has Aula created female dwarves after Iluvatar gave the seven life. In another, Iluvatar creates them but won't change Aula's design, so the genders are indistinguishable. I'm assuming there's going to be a part two. Coming in one moment with the question, so we'll come back to that in a moment. Chitara saying I have a lot of favourite style videos from Robert. The ones I really love are from the point of view ones. They're fascinating. Oh, good. I'm glad you like those. They're quite fun to write. They're actually quite more hard work than some, because you do have to go through a story and try and pick out just the bits that person's sort of involved in, and then try and work out why they did the different things. But yeah, I quite enjoy them. Since female dwarves don't have beards and are clearly women in the Rings of Power canon, does that mean in that world Aula designed female dwarves? Right, so in Tolkien canon, as far as we can tell, female dwarves do have beards and are largely, they made a joke of this in the films, but it seems to be Gimli reporting on the truth of the matter, is that most outsiders can't tell the difference between the two. As with all things, Tolkien wrote a number of different versions before kind of either he settles on something, or Christopher Tolkien, in being the editor of the Silmarillion, chooses which is the right version to go with. But when the dwarves awoke, they awoke with their mates, as it were, so that they could found their tribes. Are dwarves in the Rings of Power don't have beards? Does that mean in that world that Aula designed the female dwarves? Quite possibly. Yeah, the dwarf female dwarves don't seem to have. I mean, I'm trying to think of how many female dwarves we've seen. We've seen a few. I think this is one of those things where in Peter Jackson's world, we didn't see many female dwarves. I think we saw a couple, and I think they had a little bit of facial hair. I think this is one of those ones where they've just, in every kind of adaptation, they've kind of skipped this bit of lore because it's a little bit esoteric. But yes, I mean, I entirely follow the logic, and I get that. My instinct is that in Rings of Power canon, they I didn't go that deep and think about different versions of Tolkien's Legendarium and decide which one they were going to go with. They just went with what they thought looked cool. Is my instinct on that one. Let's go through a few more questions. Impending inspiration saying maybe we've seen more in Rings of Power, only they have beards, so we couldn't tell. Absolutely fair point. Well made. Effective rambling. Asking a question from Petyr Kumbitsa. In the Battle of Minas Tirith, did citizens fight, or only the city garrison and nearby men at Helm's Deep? At Helm's Deep, every able man fought. Were townsfolk drafted? So they drafted in. So for the Battle of Minas Tirith, they drafted in sort of soldiers from around Gondor, some of whom were clearly trained soldiers, some of whom, and I can't remember the exact. We see this bit through Pippin's eyes, but he basically says they're glorified fishermen. They're not really. They don't look like trained soldiers. In terms of the people of Minas Tirith is a garrison city. It's intended to be that way. That's why it's got the high walls. Most of the battle, and the battle happens quite quickly. Let's not forget, we're not talking something which takes place over days. Most of the battle takes place outside of the city walls, so they don't really stop for all that long. I did a full breakdown if you're interested in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. But the army crosses over the Anduin River, pushes its way through Osgiliath, and just keeps on moving. Faramir and co are just about to be overrun before there's a rescue mission. They push inside. There's like this wall that sort of extends a few miles out from Minas Tirith. They break their way through that, come through, and then they stop just in kind of catapult distance. They do a little bit of catapulting, and then so they can sort of break down some of the walls, get things on fire. The bottom level, Minas Tirith is in levels. The bottom level is largely a fire by the time they push forward even further, at which point they're already getting ground out. So there's not much hand-to-hand fighting, is the point I'm trying to make. Inside Minas Tirith, they break the doors open. Only one person manages to get through, really, which is the Witch King. At which point, then the cock crows. They hear the horns. Oh, it's the Riders of Rohan. Let's turn around and face them. So, probably the people of Minas Tirith will have been very aware. This is a massive army coming. We all have to be ready. And they will have been armed and ready to do what they needed to do. But they didn't have to, because the assault never got inside the city walls. Chitara, sorry, another newbie question. Why are they goblins in The Hobbit but orcs in Lord of the Rings? Tolkien chose different words. Is what it is. There's no significant difference. Or as Cole Carsnark says, using better language, Tolkien says they're essentially the same. He just used different terminology. Exactly. And he does, as Buttoned Up Reader points out, goblins in both. Yeah. So it's just different words for roughly the same kind of thing. Rhoda Leader, thank you very much for the kind message. Carl Klosnark says, my beard law is about a week. Any more than that, and I start to go crazy and have to shave. I know the feeling. Looking back through. Headcanon from Willie Biggs. Female dwarves in the mines tied their hair around the front of their face. Headcanon, yeah, absolutely. Gimli, though, is reasonably categorical. He doesn't seem to be pretending anything when he does say that they have beards and outsiders often can't tell the difference. But also, more importantly, we don't see them because most women dwarves do stay at home. So you don't often see them out and about. Okay, let's go. Emily Hill saying, I wonder where Robb Stark's spirit ended up, considering he probably doesn't have a statue yet and no one knows where his bones are. Yeah, so this is one of those bits of lore that we do not know or understand about the Winterfell crypts. We know that Ned's spirit went back there because Rickon and Bran both kind of sensed it. Hodor was scared of going down into the crypts at that particular moment in time. George R. Martin confirmed it was only at that particular moment in time that he was scared to go down there. Summer hackles up, didn't want to go down. That's because Ned's spirit had gone back there. Now, we do not know what combination of things needs to happen for this magic to work. Clearly, in order for the spirit to head down there, you do not need to have the statue. The statue can happen later. You also don't need the bones because Ned's bones aren't there. So the spirit seems to be taken down there, and irrespective of those elements. What happens with Robb's, we don't know because we don't have any witnesses. No, Winterfell at that moment in time is abandoned. So probably his spirit did go there in the same way that Ned's went there without having a statue or his bones being there. The question is, are they still bound there if they haven't got a statue, if their bones don't come up there? That bit we do not know. Okay, I think with that, let's just do a Greek Weirwood saying, I like Robert's Witch King party hat. Yeah, it's nice. It's a good fancy dress idea. I shall do that for some time. With that, let's just talk about what have we got going on coming up soon. If you've not checked it out, In Deep Sleep is still up and running. I'm doing the all of the back episodes of the live stream. I'm uploading them about a couple of times a week. Do check that out. If you don't know what that is, people told me that they go to sleep to these, so I decided to lean into that, and I make an 8-hour video. The first 2-3 hours or whatever is me talking, but with a nice, without my face, but some like nice image of crackling fire with the sounds in the background or whatever, and then I fade away, and that just carries on for the full 8 hours, so you can hopefully get a good night's sleep. A reminder, this on the main channel, the videos are available now over on Spotify, if you find that an easier way of consuming them. And what else shall I tell you about? Keep an eye out for a couple more Witcher videos if you're into that. I did one Witcher video a week or two ago, and I've got a couple more in the works. So I think that is it. Next week, let's come back and do another A Song of Ice and Fire one. Hardhome, that's what I was going to do. Hardhome, fascinating place. What happened there? What's going to happen there? It's clearly important on the TV show. Is it going to be as big and epic in the books? We will see. So next week we'll be talking about Hardhome. But for now, a quick thank you to moderators. You're amazing. Patrons, you're also amazing. Thank you very much. Really good questions today. Thanks, everyone. Take care, and I will see you next week.